Hi, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live series on the release of the ISM report on business. My name is Dan Zeiger. I'm a senior writer and copy editor for Inside Supply Management, and that's Institute for Supply Management's member publication. We're excited to have you with us today as we discuss a bounce back month for the Services PMI data and a pivotal month for the Services ISM report on business itself. We'll get to that a little later, but for now, let's focus on the Services PMI. The contraction in April may have been a one-off, just like the previous one in December of 22. The composite index hit 53.8% in May. That's up 4.4 percentage points and puts the script back to where it was before, possibly, that the service sector hasn't been gangbusters, but it's been consistently showing incremental growth, and that's good for the entire U.S. economy. So there's a lot to discuss, and let's bring in the chair of ISM's Services Business Survey Committee. His name is Anthony Nieves. And yeah, Tony, obviously a lot of action in the data. When you look at the sub-indexes, the boost in business activity growth definitely stood out. What kind of fueled that, and what else in the data for this month stood out to you?
Well, Dan, you definitely summed that up. It's a good report, a nice rebound, bounce back from last month's contraction on the composite index of 49.4. We're up 4.4 percentage points to 53.8. And just as you said, in December of 22, everyone kind of lost their minds back then, thinking, oh, where is the economy going? The composite index contracted for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic, and everyone was up in arms. And, last month during the release, I said, look, 1 month doesn't make a trend. Let's see where it's going. And, as we're measuring directional change here, we see that the composite index came in, and it would have been even stronger if we didn't have, that dragging or lagging index of employment. 47.1 down one. It's actually up 1.2 percentage points month over month from the 45.9. And that continues to be a mixed bag. As I've been saying, month over month for how many months now? Just employers are saying that they're managing that expense. They're cautious in their hiring. We also have cycle time that comes into play. And then yet others are like, we can't find the suitable or applicable workers to backfill the positions that we need. So what contributed to this increase? Business activity up 10.3 percentage points. Very strong jump. Why is that? Well, two of the stronger industries, I say stronger, I should say larger contributor to GDP and they're in the top four: real estate, rental and leasing, and healthcare and social assistance, both rebounded. And that's what contributed mostly to this increase. We have these four indexes that are weighted equally at 25%. We have supplier deliveries rounding out those four, and we're looking at supplier deliveries of 52.7. As demand increases, we tend to see deliveries slowing down just a bit. And so they're up 4.2 percentage points into slowing territory at 52.7. And overall, again, the composite it's beat expectations. Some came in around 47.5, 47.7 or so, were what some of the expectations were, or projections, I should say, by economists and other agencies and things that measure the economy. And this report, 1 month, we rebound, and here we are back to incremental growth.
Yeah. You mentioned the four indexes that feed into the Services PMI directly. New orders is one of those. You mentioned it ticked up a little bit, and I would imagine that it got a boost from the gain in new export orders. Now, new export orders is not one of the indexes that feeds directly into the Services PMI, but I would imagine that has a little upward pressure on new orders themselves. So, kind of indirectly, there was an impact there. Just talk about that double-digit gain in new export orders, what stood out, and kind of explain that index, because we do get a lot of questions about that. It's a little bit different than maybe on the manufacturing side because you're not dealing with tangible or finished goods. Just talk about how that on the services side, those are measured and how the index works.
Yeah, when I look at export, the export index, and each month I look at the respondent comments, and we have to understand that we don't export as much from services as you would see on the production side, finished goods side of manufacturing. It's less in tangible goods. It's more in professional, scientific, technical services, management of companies and support services. Uh, Information is another one. It's kind of under the umbrella of knowledge management. And not that we do all of the lifting when it comes to consulting and programming and things like that, but it's the strategy development that originates here. And then the mechanics of it is executed and comes back. But again, exports is a small component as far as our survey respondents. It usually fluctuates between 30 and 40% of our respondents are actually even measuring exported items. It's and again, on the tangible goods side, it would be on the wholesale trade. It would be in the retail trade arena, less reliant on that overall, comparative to what we do on the import side. But looking at it, it's one that we do have to understand, and we do measure, and it's less reliant on the exchange rate that you would see on manufacturing, because with tangible goods and raw materials, you're tying right back to the value of the dollar and the exchange rate, whereas you have more leeway and it's more abstract when you're dealing with services and not having that finished goods that are tied to raw material costs. So hopefully that's as succinct as I can get it, as far as giving an explanation on exports, but definitely something that supply management professionals tend to understand much better than, and again, it depends on industry and company, more so than what we see from, business analysts and media representatives that try to look at the eclectic nature of what we have in the services industry. 18 industries, so varied from, as I mentioned, the few that we have. And then you go all the way to mining, agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. And then you have construction in there. And someone always asks me every month, why is construction in services and not in the manufacturing sector? Again, it's all about the service of building. It's not about raw materials. It's not about building anything. It's not a plant producing something. And I always kid around with Tim Fury and say, when construction's doing badly, he can have that industry, but overall, hopefully that gives our listeners an explanation of exports.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the attention that our indexes get from economists and media, and certainly one of those that gets the most attention from that cohort is the employment index. You kind of touched on it a little bit in your opening summary, but just wanted to give you a chance to expand on it a little bit. Obviously, the ADP report today, the raw number, a little bit lower than expected from the reports that I saw. And of course, we got the big federal report coming up on Monday. So that's always, the employment index is always going to get a lot of attention, especially with services making up where most Americans work. Just to take a look give us a picture of where things stand. There, as you mentioned, there was contraction, at least it was at a slower rate than last month. Just give us the picture there.
Yes, and when you look at employment, and you have to keep in mind we're on a 4-month trend of contraction here for employment, and I mentioned earlier about how the baseline moves, and so as that bar moves each month, we're measuring from where that standpoint is. So the key thing is, I think when people look at the federal jobs report or they look at the non-farm payrolls report and they see that there's gains, and they wonder why our index will show contraction when there's job gains. And the explanation for that is we are measuring directional change. Did we add more, the same, or less jobs month over month? So you can have job gains month over month, but it's just less than the gains you had the prior month. So therefore, our index will reflect contraction. So when it comes in and says, oh, there was 155,000 jobs added, well, why is that contraction for us? And I say, because the prior month, look how many jobs they added. They added, 250,000 jobs. So it's less jobs month over month. So again, there's the directional change with the diffusion index. Employment continues, as I said in the summary. It varies by industry. certain industries, and I've been saying this ongoing for several months now, that many of the tedious type jobs, and I say tedious, labor intensive, whether it be retail, accommodation, food services, restaurants, those are hard jobs. And they have hours that are physical, that they're moving around a lot. And post pandemic, and there was a shortage of available workers out there, people were leveling up to new types of employment. There was wage pressure. They had the advantage over the employers. So that continued. And then as job availability narrowed down, we came up with this mixed bag that we have today. It's a combination of, okay, it's a variable expense, labor intensive industries. They manage their payroll according to their demand, to their revenue and volume and everything else. And so if things are not as high, they will cut back on the staffing. And so then the other side of the coin is companies are trying to backfill positions and they can't find the available workers. We see that we've seen that ongoing in construction, right? All those different trades were having difficulty in hiring workers. So that is kind of a broad brushstroke of the employment picture. And hopefully, I always said that's how this sector goes. And I'd really like to see this above 50. It's one of the variables, or one of the, I shouldn't say variables, but one of the criteria the Fed uses in managing interest rates. Besides monetary policy, they'll look at inflation and they'll look at employment. And hopefully they will be able to, impact the interest rates, or this will impact the interest rates, that they will have some decrease down the road, but it doesn't look that way anytime soon.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition into the next question that I had. I mean, as you know, you saw the report the other day, that Tim Fiore was talking about it, and he mentioned it. Our manufacturing committee members for this month's report were, just about as overt as they've ever been about how, the uncertainty over interest rate cuts and if they might happen, when they might happen, is really becoming a headwind. And I know that's something that our services respondents have talked about for quite a while now. Just in this month's report, I counted 3 comments just on that. So just give us the assessment there, and how the sentiment of the committee, and when we might see some movement from the Fed.
So you count 3 in the report,
Mm-hmm.
and I only included 3 in the report because I didn't want the Federal Reserve to think we were beating up on them.
Uh-huh.
Because there were numerous comments throughout from our respondents this month, more so than I've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I did comment on that when speaking to them. But yeah, it's in summary, what they're telling us is that it's an impediment to.
Mm-hmm.
They believe it's an impediment to business and to growing business, and especially in capital reinvestment. The cost of money is higher, and lending has definitely tightened up. The criteria has tightened up, and so definitely the interest rates, and it's a double-edged sword, because why does the Fed keep the rates where they are or raise them? To stave inflation. The other concern our respondents have is inflation. So it's kind of like, all right, how do we address one without negatively impacting the other, and vice versa? And that's where we're in this quagmire right now of, how do we manage this inflation? We see it somewhat in pricing moderating. It's increasing, as it has for the last 84 months, but it's at a moderate rate of increase versus where it's been in the past. And we've had pricing all the way up near the 80s, and it's come back down below 60 for several months, and that's manageable. But we're still seeing the impact on the cost of food, groceries. We see it in restaurants, menu prices. Food is still high cost of goods sold. We're looking at between prices, because they're all related: pricing, interest rates, inflation, all ties together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we kind of discussed this on when the manufacturing report came out, and I know you don't forecast and you don't make business plans based on assumptions. But I mean, any indication, or from the committee, any of the sentiment that, because the Fed said what was said in November, now they obviously they didn't commit to anything, but said it was a likely or a possibility. Did that kind of maybe raise expectations of maybe a little too much, and we're kind of working off disappointment, and that might be reflected in some of the business planning that is feeding into the PMI data?
That's a very good question. It's kind of where businesses do operate off of certain assumptions. I mean, when they're forecasting and projecting and trying to manage not only, and it depends, private companies, public companies, expectations, investors, getting capital funding, all this comes into play. I've experienced it in both the public and private companies that I've been involved with. And as they're trying to raise capital, whether it's from third parties or through financial institutions, the interest rates definitely affect what they're able to do. And it all has an impact as far as we know the top line revenue is important. And consumer confidence factors in. So you have all these different influences that affect these businesses, and they're just trying to get their arms around it and grow and move forward. And it's it becomes difficult when you're having to deal with all these extraneous type variables.
Yeah. You mentioned prices a little bit. Let's talk specifically about the prices index. I mean, is a slight decrease in the rate of growth. I mean, what stood out to you as you looked at that part of the report?
What stands out more than anything is the decrease in the number of items on the commodities list up in price. Compared to what we had to deal with back during the pandemic days, when it was definitely about capacity and supply and demand and availability of products. Now, the biggest influencer out there for pricing has always been, in my opinion, and what is reflected in the report, is fuel. And we see fuels up and down in price, and people say, well, fuel a bit. Come down from where? I mean, where were fuel prices 3 years ago compared to where they are today? I know when I have to fill up my car, it's like I want to put a hard hat on when I'm reading the pump. It's definitely affecting overland trucking and shipping, transportation costs. It all factors in the cost of transportation and moving products, all these disparate locations. We're a very big country when you compare the size of the U.S. You can fit, most of Europe into the northeastern corridor of the United States. So we are definitely reliant on that. And so when we look at the price of oil, the barrel price, and still what the cost is for the consumer, it's made a big difference. Look at energy costs, same thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's been a great overview. I mean, anything in regards to this month's data that, we haven't covered, or anything that I didn't ask that you think might be important for our viewers to know?
Well, inventory, we see that inventory is down 1.6 percentage points to 52.1. And our respondents have indicated that they're trying to right size their inventories. It is about cash flow, cash liquidity, trying to maintain that, ability of demand pull. The cycle time on services is much less than what you see on the manufacturing side. It's a demand pull orientation for service companies. And so they really try to do that hand-to-mouth type ordering. And we're seeing that as they're really focusing in on, as we've also had improved capacity in the supply chain, has made it less reliant to stock up and have longer lead times, and dealing with longer lead times, I should say.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was a good overview of the month. Obviously, an important month with the index moving into expansion territory again. And as I had mentioned at the top of our broadcast, it is a pivotal month for the Services ISM report on business. For those who did not know, this is Tony's last report as chair. He is moving on. And I wanted to give you an opportunity as we raise our glass. I know I'll raise my coffee mug. But you at the conference, and there have been other tributes to you as appreciation for your years of service. And yeah, that's really cool. For those that don't know, Tony is not the first chair of the Services Committee, but he's been the chair since it went public, since we released it for the first time in January of 2008. So yeah, he's been the face of the Services ISM report on business for as long as it's been public. And, just a great run for you. I love to hear you kind of sum up your tenure and, just what your service and, what the Services ISM report on business, in your eyes, what it means to the, supply chain and the economic communities.
Well, thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. And, I've been involved with ISM for many years, served on the board for 6 years before I was asked about taking on the role of the chair of the Services Committee. And I think back to, it was like 2007, around this time that I started, and we released the first composite index after many months of research. And looking back historically on GDP and what would contribute to a close map to GDP, we came out with our first composite index of January 2008, and it contracted. The only thing running through my mind was I did not want to leave on a note of contraction. So
you went out a winner.
Yeah, I'm glad we're in positive territory here. But the one thing I will say about this report, and there's others that have come out and tried to emulate the report on business since the inception of this report. And this report started, back in the throes of the recession in the 1930s, 1931, if I'm not mistaken, on the manufacturing side, came out with National Association of Purchasing Agents. It was requested by the federal government for ISM at the time to measure and help the government and assist in providing data. And the one thing this report, what differentiates it more than anything, we have practitioners, people in enterprise and different businesses, small, medium, large, based on contribution to GDP, boots on the ground that contribute to this report. We've had consistent survey members, the staff, you included, that back this report up. ISM staff does a fantastic job with all the managing and collection. First report that comes out each month, first business day and third business day. And it is as close to real-time measurement that you can get. And when you map it historically against GDP, nothing comes closer than the ISM report on business. So every month I did it since the start back in 2007 has made me even a stronger believer of how important and how much of a contributor the report on business is for not only the business community, but globally, as people have gone out, companies have gone out, government agencies have gone out and tried to either emulate or they derive information from this report in creating their own reports. So that's my summary on the report on business. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be part of it. And I know it will continue on with Steve, and he's got great support with the staff. So all the best.
Yeah. Well, as we've said, Tony's moving on, and it's a great opportunity to introduce his successor. His name is Steve Miller. And next month, he'll assume oversight of the Services ISM report on business. He'll write the monthly report, speak on behalf of the companies that make up the Services Business Survey Committee. And yes, we are threatening to continue doing this broadcast every day, every release day. Steve is a senior advisor for Robin Hill Senior Advisory Group, a chief commercial officer for Deep Logica AI, and he also serves on the board of advisors for Focal Point Procurement and the Harrison Group. He's served as a board member for ISM, and he has 4 decades of experience in procurement and supply management with such companies as Disney, P.F. Chang's, Accenture, and Kearney. So he brings some heavy credentials to the Services ISM report on business. Steve, welcome, and here, I'll give you an opportunity to make an opening statement.
Sure. Thank you, Dan. Tony's a global leader and mentor in supply management. He's somebody I greatly respect. It's really a privilege, and I'm excited to follow him in the role as chair of the ISM Services Business Survey Committee. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. What attracted you to this role? And, just what, obviously you wouldn't have taken it on if you didn't feel that the services report on business was an important economic indicator and a vital tool for supply managers. Just, talk about those dynamics.
Sure. Yeah. I've spent most of my career in the services industries, and I've always looked at the report, at least over the last, 15 years. As a resource to kind of give you an insight into what other people are thinking and what you should be thinking about in the future, especially the longer range perspectives and seeing what others are thinking and whether I'm seeing the same things. It's been a very valuable tool for me, and it's like I said, it's a privilege to be chairing the committee and working with the ISM team to be able to provide those insights. It's something that ISM is uniquely doing within the industry to provide this tool, and these tools also at the manufacturing index, to folks in the industry to help us be smarter in what we do in business.
Yeah. Well, we have an extra minute here or so. I mean, obviously, Tony's been giving his analysis, on these calls, and you've been reading the data as well. As you look across the landscape of the services sector from your chair, I mean, what things stand out to you, especially as it relates to the PMI data?
Well, I think Tony summed it up great. The types of things that he was mentioning, especially the areas of concern, are very similar to what I'm hearing in general throughout the industry. I'm at a conference today where that's getting costs out and being able to prepare in a tight capital environment to be able to perform to satisfy customers' needs. It's kind of an ongoing situation for many months now.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as we know, Steve Miller is the new chair of the Services ISM Business Survey Committee. And you have an opportunity to be able to join that committee. We have a website where you can go to ismworld.org /join the panel. There it is. Yeah, and it just takes a few minutes every month where you're just answering some simple questions, and it really feeds into some very important economic data that is of use not only for the supply management community but also the economic community, as we see every month when the reports come out. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah. For more information, feel free to go at ismworld.org, where in a little bit you can read the roundup article that will discuss a lot of what we've mentioned here, as well as how the markets are taking the data. And we'll see you back here in a month's time when we break down the June ISM report on business, and we may have all kinds of fun pranks and initiation rituals for Steve, the new guy. So for Tony Nieves, Steve Miller, and some wonderfuls who helped us behind the scenes today, Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens, my name's Dan Zeiger. We'll see you next time.